Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the ICBA Cast, live on Facebook and available soon as a podcast in the iTunes Store, icba.ca, at ICBABC on Twitter, facebook.com/theICBA. I'm Jordan Bateman. I'm Director of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, joined as always by
Chris Gardner, President of ICBA.
And Chris, we have a very special guest here today.
Very exciting.
In a much more exciting shirt than you and I wore.
Yes,
All
that's
right.
true. Yeah.
Ken Berg is here, the Executive Director of the Canada West Construction Union, correct?
Indeed.
And also Executive Director of Canada Works Strategies.
Canada Works, yes.
Canada Works, pardon me.
Yeah.
We no longer strategize at Canada Works. We just work.
There you go.
No. Two big organizations, two great organizations that we're looking forward to talking about more today. For 42 years, ICBA has been the voice of BC's construction and responsible resource development industries and a relentless and passionate advocate for free enterprise. This morning, almost 250,000 people got up across British Columbia, went to work in construction, contributing 9% of the BC economy. On this podcast, we talk about BC politics, economic issues from a free enterprise, free market perspective, and lots to talk about here. Let's talk about first, though, what today is. It is May the 4th, Star Wars Day. And Chris, Star Wars near and dear to the ICBA's heart for some reason.
Right. That's right. Well, you know, at the Buildex trade show, the largest construction-related trade show west of Toronto in Canada, we adopted the Star Wars theme, and we had a lot of interesting little buttons we handed out at the conference. My favorite was, it's going to come up here in a minute, about government reviews, and we tried to take a lightsaber to red tape. Red tape is a big issue facing us now, particularly with a new government that's rolling in a whole new host of regulations. But government review, it's a trap.
Yeah, Admiral Akbar had it right. These are available on our Facebook page, on our Instagram, on our Twitter, so feel free to share them. If you're really nerdy, I love the NIMBYs want construction in Alderaan places. But man, that's like a deep Star Wars dive. I am happy to report BB-8 will be visiting he lives here at the ICBA office.
Yes.
And he will be touring shortly, so watch for that on our Instagram later today. All right, well, enough malarkey. Ken, we're excited to have you here. One of the knocks on ICBA over the years is that we reflexively hate all unions, period, which is not true. In fact, we have many members who have workforces with different unions. We're excited to talk to you, though, because CWU has been growing like a weed, and it's been really amazing to see the market response to a progressive union that puts their workers first.
Yeah. Union density in Canada has fallen by half since the 1970s. So in the 1970s, in the private sector, union density sat around 30%. Today, it's less than 15%. So if you're part of a movement like that loses half of its relevance, you have to ask yourself some pretty hard questions. And my perspective on labor relations, and I think it's profoundly true in the construction sector, is you better have a successful employer if you want to be a successful employee. So that means you advance your concerns as a worker when your employer is successful. So that doesn't mean unions roll over and play dead, or they're lapdogs for management. But what it does mean is that unions find ways to collaborate. And if you're not sensitive to the market, you're going to be out of the market. And so that's critical to the progressive union movement.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I think, a very important point: the decline in the unionization rate in the private sector. What accounts for that decline? It's been cut in nearly half in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I think exclusivity and monopolies are no longer part of the game in the construction sector, right? We don't live in the 1970s, 1980s, where the building trades controlled the construction market, controlled the supply of labor. And so they have, over the course of the recent decades, jealously tried to continue through control mechanisms, whether it's been through apprentices and training or just using non-affiliation clauses. They've attempted to maintain control, but really what they've done is they've lost in that fight. Because if you don't create a proposition that's attractive to workers and attractive to industry, you're going to lose. They may delay the inevitable and slow down the market realities, but the reality is that they've had a shrinking and diminishing role in the economy because their message to workers and to industry isn't relevant. You have to add value.
Yeah.
Well, and workers now, they want choice, they want flexibility.
Yeah.
They don't want to be constrained by rules that don't make sense in the workplace.
I think they want entrepreneurial opportunities as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll just add, one of the most critical things in the construction sector is when you have a project that's delineated by craft. If you have 17 different crafts, all represented by 17 different unions, not only do you have mass inefficiency, what you also have from a worker perspective is the inability to cross-train and to work as a team. And how critical is that, right? For people who want to advance their careers. And I think that's one of the critical issues that's been missed by the labor movement is they jealously guard their jurisdiction. They even have this kind of front of being unified, but they can't get along amongst themselves. And we all know that.
Yeah.
So the progressive union movement, the likes of Canada West Construction Union, the likes of CLAC, proudly advance a wall-to-wall model. So you're part of a team that's building a project. And these jurisdictional issues don't create inefficiencies, and they create opportunities to advance your career, to multi-skill, develop different competencies, and that's what you want in furthering your career, for sure.
That's a great point, too, because one of the knocks on ICBA over the years from the building trades guys is, you don't care about worker safety. But if you have a paralysis involved where a guy could only do one thing on a site and doesn't really understand the overall picture, you're actually causing safety issues because they don't know what they don't know, right? And having cross-trained workers, that's an interesting point that probably gets lost in a lot of the shuffle.
So, and one thing to keep in mind, on the point that private sector unionization has declined in half, now about 15% of the workforce. If you think of the traditional building trades makeup of the 250,000 workers in this province, it's less than 15%. They haven't been competitive to the point you've raised. They haven't been responsive, not only to workers, but to owners who are looking for value and more efficient ways to innovate when they build projects. So the fact that building trades now represent less than 15% is really a stunning indictment on their model. The model doesn't work. It hasn't worked. Yeah. And so when you come along and now you've got thousands of workers who are members of CW taking a more progressive approach, the reason why you're gaining members is because you are responding to the needs of workers and to the needs of the business community.
Yeah, indeed. So everybody, you can put whatever number you want in the back of an agreement. It can be a really sexy number, and you can show it to your friends at a bar. But if it doesn't result in you getting a great T4 at the end of the year, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm interested in, I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, so I pick up a lot of news out of Wisconsin, and I've been watching Scott Walker and some of the labor reforms that have been going on there, right-to-work legislation, things like that. England as well, I believe, took away mandatory unionization for employees in union companies. But, the question I have about that is, like how, we're entering an environment today where the NDP want to pay back, the building trades unions for providing them so much support over the years. When we can talk about PLAs in a moment, but what are the unions missing? Like, why don't they understand that they have to provide customer service, worker service? As soon as the opportunity comes for anyone to get out of these unions, they seem to do it, as we've seen in Wisconsin and England and elsewhere. Like, why haven't they clicked into the fact that they've got to be providing better services to their workers?
Well, I think it comes down to a very basic principle, and that is competition. Competition's good for any sector, right? It keeps all the participants in that sector sharp. And when you're used to relying upon a monopoly, like they had for so many years, you don't have to stay sharp. You don't have to stay sharp in the eyes of industry. You don't have to stay sharp in the eyes of your workers. And you know what? I'll say this: that there aren't the traditional union movement isn't populated by 100% of people who have ill will for the people that represent. I just think they simply missed the mark on a strategic level. Yeah. And I think there's ideological differences and that sort of thing as well. But fundamentally, I wake up in the morning and I go, how do I do worker advocacy really well? And I fundamentally believe that your part, and if you're going to participate in this economy, you better be sensitive to where the market pressures are. And that does not mean you can't provide strong, responsible advocacy, great dispute resolution, competitive collective agreements, health and welfare plans that are good for the worker and their families. Those things aren't mutually exclusive with being sensitive to the market. And I think that's the core of it.
Okay. We have a chart here. It shows union coverage in the public sector, so government workers, and it's kind of hovered around 78-80% for 2 decades. We then have a slide here, private sector union coverage, which has dropped from about 25% 20 years ago to less than 18% today in British Columbia. which leads into a conversation we should have about project labor agreements. With so many people in government, and frankly, cabinet ministers coming out of traditional trade union environment, they know this graph better than anyone. They know that they're losing ground, especially in the private sector. They're now tilting the playing field through PLAs, or what they call community benefit agreements, to try a last gasp effort to prop up the building trades. How do we fight that, and how do we make sure that taxpayers are getting the best value for dollars?
Yeah.
Well, one comment on that. What effectively is happening is that the NDP government is going to do what the building trades has not been able to do in a competitive market environment. They're going to do by legislation. They're going to prop up building trades artificially, because building trades, the model has failed, as Ken just referenced, and that's going to cost taxpayers, and it's going to hurt our economy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, exclusivity is a bad deal. Right?
Yeah.
When you try to create exclusive deals, I think there's something inherently problematic about that. So as you alluded to earlier, you have a very small segment of the market, 15%, that might even be generous, 15% of the market is going to potentially get access to how many tens of billions of dollars of government-funded work. And here's where, from a worker perspective, I have a real problem. The members that we represent are ratepayers, they're taxpayers, and you're telling them by virtue of their choice of union, they can't go work on this project?
Yeah.
Really? Defend that public policy.
Even if they have the best bid, even if they have better,
that's right. So
it's going to be tilted against
Think
them.
of the Patella Bridge. The Premier Horgan and the NDP have been very clear.
$1.5 billion.
$1.5 billion project is going to be built by union-only labor. So you're basically saying you're going to take $1.5 billion of our tax dollars, and you're going to segment that and apply it only to opportunities for 15% of the construction workforce.
It's favoritism.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
And the first thing they'll hide behind is this notion of a community benefit agreement. And they'll say that, hey, you know what we're actually doing here? We're satisfying the requirement to have apprentices trained. We're satisfying the requirement to have First Nations involvement. We're satisfying the requirement to have women involved in trades and that kind of thing. All of which are virtuous, noble pursuits, and I would argue we need more of that, if anything.
Yep.
Here's the issue. You don't need to bolt that onto a building trades collective agreement. You can have commercial agreements that, in fact, we have a long history of having done that. We do that.
It is happening now.
Yeah. And we should, and I would be the first person to say, let's do that and more. Let's make sure these marginalized groups absolutely are taken care of. They are critical participants in our economy. Yeah. But that does not mean that has to be somehow married and meshed in with a building trades only exclusive agreement. Right. They don't have some sort of virtuous mandate to go achieve these goals. And that's what's even bothersome. I mean, it's wonderful flowery language. Let's hide behind community benefits agreements. It's just code speak for, here we want to pay back our friends. That's all it is.
It doesn't make any sense. And the head of the building trades has said time and time again that the last 20 years he's embarrassed by the record of construction in British Columbia. And I find that quite shocking that a leader in the construction industry is discounting all of the tremendous work that men and women in construction have done in this province the last 20 years, the projects they built, whether it's Sea to Sky, Port Mann, Kicking Horse Canyon, hospitals, schools, great projects, great work by men and women in construction. And it shows in my mind that the building trades is concerned about one thing only, and that's the business of the union and not the interests of the workers.
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested in the interests of the workers, they'd be standing up and screaming from the rooftops that we should build Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline because thousands of construction jobs on the line.
They're silent on Kinder Morgan. They were silent on Site C. They were silent on PNW LNG.
Yeah.
The only time you hear the building trades speak up is to protect the interests of the NDP government and the PLA agreements that the NDP are crafting specifically to meet their interests.
And they'll take statistical evidence and just shape it into a convenient message for them. But I really do like this the story, the Rio Tinto, the Kitimat modernization project. We got statistics from some of their workforce dynamics halfway through. 25% of the workers outside of BC, 8% of the workers temporary foreign workers, and then we hear them going up to Site C and criticizing an 82% local ratio as being somehow unacceptable. Come on.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And then complain that there aren't enough apprentices when most of the work that was going on at Site C at the time they pulled a stat was trucking out dirt, right? Like you don't have truck driver apprentices.
Right. Well, and further to that fact, we talk about apprenticeship as though it's some sort of, it only works when it's highly regulated and through some framework. The fact of the matter is on Site C there's lots of civil work there. Well, equipment operators aren't a Red Seal trade, but that doesn't mean that a ton of mentorship isn't going on.
Yeah, young workers are there.
In fact, the senior positions in collective agreements actually have, as part of their job descriptions often, the requirement to mentor younger employees. That's apprenticeship. It's just not recognized by the regulatory body.
And we should look, John Horgan came into office and he hates the progressive unions. He hates ICBA. In a speech to the steelworkers, he called us all turkeys several times. I suspect he probably hates the building trades, may even hate you guys more than us, simply because we don't take money out of their pocket the way that, by virtue of who's organizing. But this is a long-standing bias within the NDP cabinet, and so many of them, I can't think of a single small business owner or anyone who actually ran a business who's in cabinet now. They're all from either government relations or from the traditional labor movement.
The reality is we're facing a shortage of workers in this province, of skilled and qualified workers. To build major construction projects, the government should be saying that on every project, no matter how a company is organized, everyone should have a right to bid that project, and there should be a focus on value, experience, expertise, and then the best bid, taking all that into account, would win. And so we're going to have we should have work sites where you have union companies, non-union companies, companies with employee agreements all working together to deliver that project for taxpayers in British Columbia. To basically say, no, we're going to take all of the tax dollars for major infrastructure projects and allocate that to less than 15% of the construction workers, that's not fair. It's not good policy, and taxpayers are going to end up paying the price. And 85% of the construction workers are going to lose opportunities because of that.
Yeah, we should touch too on the it's not just PLAs. I mean, there's the labor code review, there's WorkSafe BC reviews, there's stacking the deck on the Industry Training Authority board. Like, they are very much trying to stretch the building trades, the traditional trades tentacles into every part of government, every part of what governs how things are built in this province. I imagine you guys are just as busy as we are when it comes to trying to respond to all of these reviews and put a reasonable voice forward.
Yeah, I think and these sorts of things are often, I think, lost on folks. Things like safety and training, we just kind of think are these benign things that happen through virtuous institutions and regulatory bodies doing great things. And when it comes down to it, and we're seeing evidence of that, these are political files, right?
Yeah.
It just lost focus, again, to my earlier point. We're losing focus on the workers, and we're losing focus on creating a viable economy. And that's, again, where we always come back to. We look through that lens. Is this good for the workers of BC? And does it support a healthy economy where they can actually go to work?
Yeah, and it's eroding economic certainty, which is a big concern of Chris's as far as bringing investment into British Columbia. Ripping up the contract on or on the Trans Mountain Pipeline is one thing, but even things like this, where the worker environment can be so radically changed based on ideology, not facts. Yeah. It scares away investment.
It does. And, it all starts with a job. It all starts with investment. And the fact that we now have a regulatory system and a tax regime that's created uncertainty. We have government saying, this government has said on Kinder Morgan, a $7.4 billion project, investment in our economy, that even though it was approved nearly 2 years ago, they're going to use every tool in their toolbox to block it, and they're doing a very good job of that. Okay. Site C, 20% complete, a $10 billion project. They reviewed that. If it hadn't been 20% complete, in all likelihood, they would have canceled that project. Yeah. It's irresponsible leadership. It's sending a very chilling message to investors within Canada, outside Canada. You can't get major projects approved and built in this province. It's going to hurt our economy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're already starting to see it. Royal Bank capital fleeing in real time is the quote from the president there. Suncor saying, we have big hopes for oil and gas in Canada, but not big enough to actually put any money into oil and gas in Canada. It's pretty concerning. Chris, any update on the Confidence in Canada movement? CWU being a part of that as well.
Yeah, so we've, it's been interesting to see the business community, community leaders, First Nation leaders rally around the Kinder Morgan project. There's now been 108 organizations that have signed an open letter to the Prime Minister saying that we need the Government of Canada to act decisively to move this project forward. It's in the interest of our national economy and of BC. You can't have a premier rip up a contract, which is effectively what he's doing. And you can't have a premier basically say, decide what goods are going to flow through a federally regulated port. Premier Horgan does not get to pick and choose what goods from different provinces get to flow through the port of Metro Vancouver. And the federal government has to act quickly. If this project is cancelled, it will do irreparable damage to our economy, and there will be no major foreign investor who are going to look at British Columbia and say, "Whoa, hang on, should we really be looking at investing our dollars into British Columbia?"
Yeah, we were really excited to see CLAC signed on as well. CLAC and CW both signing on to that letter, because it took it from just being businesses, municipalities, First Nation leaders, and added a whole other section. And together these 110 organizations now. Represent millions and millions of Canadians. And we deserve to have our voice heard. We've seen public opinion shift strongly in favor of finishing the pipeline. But again, it's ideology, not fact, evidence-based decision making.
And that's important, because going back to your earlier point, ICBA is not anti-union. We're clear, we are crystal clear on this point. We think that workers should have the right to join a union. But that opinion should be expressed through a secret ballot. And if they decide through a secret ballot process to join in, great. If that's the will of the workers on that project or in that company. If they don't, that should be respected as well. And less than 15% of the construction workers in this province are aligned with the traditional building trades. And unions like CW, progressive unions, get strong support from ICBA. And our approach is, listen, everyone's welcome on the job site.
It's an inclusive model.
That's right.
Right. And if you believe in the concept of freedom of association, the corollary to that is that there's a freedom not to associate as well. And we respect that as well.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to touch a little bit too on, we've talked a lot about the progressive unions and about pure open shop as far as ICBA goes. There's also employee associations and other models that...
Yeah, I mean, and Ken, that's your world. It's not, there isn't one answer to how workers in a company will organize. It takes many different forms.
Absolutely, yeah. Employee associations, essentially what they are is unions that are viewed in the eyes of the law as a legitimate union, but they're limited to the scope of the employees of one employer. And so something our organization does as well is comes along and supports those, makes sure they function well or operationalize well, that the workers are getting the advocacy that they need and deserve. And again, that we're positioning labor and management together for shared success. That's the model.
Perfect. And we should note fewer than 10 work stoppages in British Columbia in all sectors of the economy in 2016. And you can see the trend line certainly going down.
So we've had relative labor peace.
Yeah. So what problem are we trying to solve here?
What is the NDP government trying to do? And they will create uncertainty, they'll create disruption and confusion, and it's going to hurt our economy. And it's going to hurt workers. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, let's talk about Washington, D.C. Ken, Chris and I are just back from Washington. We were down there for a conference on some advocacy information. We saw President Lincoln, we saw President Jefferson, we did the Washington Memorial, we did a bunch of museums, we crashed the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the so-called Nerd Prom. I like this picture of Chris with his hands on hips. He's kind of like a sassy Kim Kardashian kind of pose there on the red carpet. Good stuff. But we did have a reason, besides the conference, to go down. We wanted to meet Chris Wallace. And Chris is the host of Fox News Sunday. It's on the Fox Network, one of the big four political affairs programs on Sunday mornings. Veteran journalist, also hosted Meet the Press on NBC, hosted the final debate in the Trump-Clinton campaign. That was the one where the Trump campaign brought all of Bill Clinton's alleged mistresses and had them seated right behind Chris. Anyways, Chris is coming to Vancouver on May 16th for ICBA's Industry Outlook Forum. Ken will be there.
Yes.
Absolutely. We'll be there, of course. Chris, tell us about Chris Wallace, meeting him, and how excited we are for Outlook.
Well, listen, Chris is iconic. A lot of listeners will know that his father, Mike Wallace, was iconic on 60 Minutes. Sunday nights, you'd hear, and I'm Mike Wallace, and this is 60 Minutes. Chris is an outstanding journalist. By all accounts, the third presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was the best moderated one. And he is very highly regarded. So we got a tour of the studio, sat in his office. His office is incredibly small.
Yes.
And it was great to meet him, and we're very excited to welcome him on May 16th at our breakfast at the Hyatt Hotel. He'll also be speaking with former Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall, who'll be with us as well. Chris will be putting in context what's happening in Washington. There's a lot happening in Washington. It seems to happen every single day, and how that might impact our economy and other world hotspots like North Korea. And Brad Wall's going to put that in the Canadian context and talk about the competitiveness challenges that we face in Canada. And he'll obviously be speaking out and making some very interesting comments on Kinder Morgan and the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It's going to be a great breakfast.
Yeah, it doesn't get reported much, but Saskatchewan, his successor, Scott Moe, they've passed legislation backing up Alberta as far as turning off the taps if John Horgan kills Trans Mountain. And Brad Wall, I mean, unshackled now. Former premiers get to talk a lot more bluntly than current premiers. He's been a strong proponent, not just of responsible resources and what it did for Saskatchewan touring around, but also of the construction industry as a whole. So we are excited to have him come. We hope he tears the NDP argument against the pipeline apart. It should be a good time. ICBA.ca/outlook. We've sold more than 400 tickets. We're down to the last few seats. So if you've been on the fence about coming, ICBA.ca/outlook. You can get Ken Berg's autograph there. So, I mean, what could be better?
Rookie card.
That's right. All right. Anything else we've missed? Anything else you want to talk about?
Nothing to add, no.
All right. Ken, thank you for joining us. CWCU.ca, correct?
Yep.
Is the website. Are you on Twitter?
We're getting there.
All right, we're going to launch Ken on Twitter. It'll be exciting. I will
right.
retweet him madly. Chris will never be on Twitter. Chris is the kind of guy who, when he's mentioned on Twitter, we print out the thing for him and show him. It's very
exciting.
Very exciting.
Yes.
But he's dominating Facebook. Facebook.com/theICBA, at ICBABC, ICBA.ca. Is the website. Stay tuned throughout the week for more video content. It's been a little quiet on the video side the last week and a half. It's because we were in Washington.
That's right.
It's hard to do stuff from there, but we are back, and we've got a bunch of guests coming through in the next couple of weeks that you'll want to hear from. And as news breaks out of Victoria, and it seems like every morning the NDP foists a new level of hell upon us, we will be responding quickly on video and on Facebook. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Have a great weekend.